Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time we're really getting into something that a lot of you have been asking about. The impact of background knowledge on standardized testing. Specifically, we're looking at the SBAC, and a listener sent in some excerpts from an article. Bridging the Gap, Background Knowledge, Prior Knowledge, and the Injustice of Standardized Testing. It's by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks. Have you had a chance to look at this one yet?
Yeah, it's a really powerful piece, especially when we consider Dr. Hoerricks' background. They teach in a Title I school, high number of students with IEPs. They're seeing these declining SBAC scores firsthand. And their argument is that it's not about student ability, but more of a disconnect between what we're teaching and what these tests are actually measuring.
A disconnect, yeah. I think that's putting it lightly. One of the first things that really grabbed my attention was this: the distinction between background knowledge and prior knowledge. Can you kind of break that down for us?
Sure. So background knowledge, as Dr. Hoerricks defines it, it's really that information that we get externally, mostly through formal education. So you're thinking textbooks, lectures, the stuff we do in the classroom.
Right.
Prior knowledge, on the other hand, that's built over time from our personal experiences, our lived realities, all those things that we accumulate along the way.
Okay.
It's really that unique lens that every single one of us brings to the table when we're trying to learn something new.
It's almost like, I don't know if you remember, there's that Anne and Sam analogy that they use in the article. So Anne, she has all this experience in dementia care, and she just flourishes in her new role at the psych clinic. But then there's Sam, who's relying just on that initial training, and he's really struggling. It makes you think about how much of what we're learning is really sinking in versus just going through the motion.
Right. And that's such a great point because it brings up that whole idea of the depth of understanding. Like, are we really getting it? Or are we just kind of, absorbing these facts without really integrating them into what we already know? And, for autistic students, this distinction is absolutely huge. They often have these incredible depths of prior knowledge, in very specific areas, but then they might have gaps in what we would consider general knowledge. And that can make standardized tests incredibly challenging for them.
So we have this potential gap between what's being taught and what's on these tests. But the article takes it even further. Dr. Hoerricks suggests that these declining SBA scores that we're seeing, they're actually linked to students not having enough opportunities to really develop and integrate that prior knowledge. Do you think that's a valid point?
I think it's a really interesting argument. Dr. Hoerricks brings up things like equity grading, which, we're all trying to create more inclusive classrooms. But could it be that in doing so, we're maybe unintentionally shortchanging students when it comes to really owning that knowledge and being able to use it in the long run?
That makes me think about, I don't know about you, but when I was in school, we had midterms and finals, those big, scary exams. And yeah, they were stressful, but I almost wonder if that forced us to go back and really consolidate all that information. Maybe that helped us learn more deeply.
It's funny because no one wants to go back to just high-stakes testing.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something to be said for, that struggle a little bit to push ourselves. So how do we find that right balance? How do we support students, help them feel safe, while also making sure that they develop those critical thinking skills and that ability to synthesize information?
It's like we're looking for that sweet spot, right? Between nurturing and challenging. We want them to feel supported, but also prepare them for a world that demands critical thinking and being able to connect the dots.
Absolutely. And all of this leads us to what I think is Dr. Hoerricks' main argument, that standardized tests like the SBAC are fundamentally unjust because they're so focused on these narrow metrics of growth.
Right. It's not just about how narrow the metrics are, is it? The article also points out that there are these cultural and geographical biases built into these tests.
Absolutely. You think about the reading passages, for example. So much of it is focused on what we might call Americana, those classic American themes. And that puts students from different cultural backgrounds at a huge disadvantage.
It's almost like we're saying, hey, to succeed in this system, you have to know about baseball and apple pie. But that ignores the incredible diversity of experiences and knowledge that students bring to the classroom.
And this, of course, has a disproportionate impact on migrant students and students with IEPs who are already navigating a system that wasn't really designed for them.
Imagine being a student who just immigrated from a culture where knowledge is collective, and then suddenly they're thrown into this high-stakes testing environment where it's all about individual performance.
Exactly. It's a real disconnect.
It really makes you question, What would a truly equitable testing system even look like? What would we be measuring and how would we do it? Would we even need standardized tests at all in a system that valued all those different ways of knowing and learning?
That's the million-dollar question, and I think it's a question we need to be asking ourselves. If we truly believe that education is about cultivating well-rounded individuals, critical thinkers, engaged citizens, then shouldn't our assessments reflect that?
That's a powerful thought. And I think it leads perfectly into our next segment. Because we've talked about the problems, but what about solutions? So, when we come back, we'll explore Dr. Hoerricks' recommendations for bridging this gap between what students know and how we actually measure their learning.
Welcome back. Before we jump into Dr. Hoerricks' solutions, I think we really need to address that deep-seated belief in standardized testing. It's the ultimate measure of success in education.
It's true. It feels like we've created this system where teaching to the test has become the norm. And the pressure to raise those scores, sometimes it overshadows the real goal, fostering a love of learning, developing critical thinking skills.
And Dr. Hoerricks points this out. This fixation on standardized tests, it really reveals this desire to produce standard humans. But that completely disregards the incredible diversity of human intelligence, learning styles, you name it.
It's like we're trying to fit everyone into the same mold.
Exactly. We should be creating a system that allows individuals to flourish in their own unique ways.
It makes you wonder if those declining SBAC scores, maybe they're not so much about students failing, but more about a system that's struggling to keep up with how learners are evolving.
That's a really important point. Dr. Hoerricks argues that instead of trying to fix students, we should be looking at the system itself, asking ourselves some hard questions. Are we really giving students the tools they need to navigate this complex, rapidly changing world? Are we truly valuing all those different ways of knowing and learning?
And I think it's important to acknowledge the role of cultural background here. The article talks about how students from indigenous cultures, or matristic cultures, where knowledge is seen as collective, not individual, they're often disadvantaged by tests that focus on individual performance.
Absolutely. It's like we're saying their ways of knowing and learning are less valid.
Right.
We need to move away from this narrow view of intelligence. Recognize that knowledge can be expressed in so many different ways. Imagine a world where oral traditions were given the same weight as written exams.
Or where working together to solve problems was valued as highly as individual test scores.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful vision, but how do we actually get there? I mean, we have this deeply entrenched system of standardized testing.
It starts with challenging the status quo. Dr. Hoerricks calls for a radical reimagining of assessment, moving away from those high-stakes tests towards more inclusive, flexible methods, ones that allow students to show what they know in ways that play to their strengths.
So things like project-based learning, portfolios, presentations.
Exactly. Assessments that reflect real-world situations, where students can actually apply their knowledge in creative and meaningful ways.
Instead of just memorizing facts for a multiple-choice test, they could design a community garden, or write and perform a play, or even create a website that solves a real problem.
Exactly. Those types of assessments, they not only give us a better picture of what students understand, but they also foster that deeper engagement, a love of learning. And let's not forget those 21st century skills: collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity.
Those are the skills everyone keeps talking about.
Exactly.
It sounds ideal, but I can imagine there's going to be a lot of pushback. People cling to standardized tests, even with all their flaws,
Right.
because they provide the sense of objectivity, a way to compare and rank students.
And that's where we need to have those difficult conversations about what we truly value in education. Is it about data points and rankings? Or is it about developing well-rounded individuals who are prepared to contribute to society in meaningful ways?
If we could shift our focus from competition to collaboration, from standardization to personalization.
Exactly. Then we can start creating a system that honors the potential of every learner.
I love that shifting from competition to collaboration. It makes me think about classrooms as spaces where students learn from each other, where different perspectives are valued, and where assessment is a tool for growth, not a weapon for sorting and ranking.
That's the kind of transformation we need. And it's not just about changing the tests. It's about changing the entire culture of education, empowering teachers, engaging families and communities, recognizing that education is a shared responsibility.
It's a big vision, but it feels achievable if we can shift our thinking. and start taking those concrete steps. But what about the students who are in the system right now? What can we do to support them while we work towards that larger vision of reform?
That's a great question, and Dr. Hoerricks addresses that directly in the article. Even within the constraints of standardized testing, there are things we can do to mitigate the harm and create a more equitable learning environment.
So we've talked about this ambitious roadmap for changing education, but let's get practical. What are some things that teachers, parents, even students themselves can do right now to make a difference? When we come back, we'll dive into Dr. Hoerricks' recommendations for bridging the gap between assessment and true learning. All right, so we've been talking big picture stuff, but let's get down to brass tacks. What can we actually do right now with the system we have to make assessment more equitable and meaningful?
Well, Dr. Hoerricks offers some really practical advice for educators. They're the ones on the front lines. And one thing they emphasize is that standardized test scores. While we can't really avoid them right now, they should never be seen as the only way to measure a student's worth or potential.
Right, it's not the whole picture
Exactly. It's just one data point, one snapshot.
of a much bigger learning journey.
Right.
It's about seeing the student, not just the score.
Absolutely. Recognizing their strengths, their challenges, their unique learning styles, and not letting a single test define their future.
So even in a system that's so focused on these tests, there's still room for flexibility, for personalization.
Absolutely.
We can advocate for more project-based assessments, portfolios, presentations, things like that. Things that give students a chance to show what they know in more authentic ways.
Exactly. And Dr. Hoerricks talks specifically about incorporating diverse cultural content into assessments.
Oh, that's interesting.
So instead of just focusing on Americana, why not have students explore the history and knowledge systems of, say, Mexico or Maya civilizations?
Right, broadening those horizons.
Or allow them to demonstrate their understanding through storytelling or oral presentations, honoring those cultures where oral history is so important.
It's about recognizing that intelligence isn't one size fits all, and students should be able to show what they know in ways that make sense for them and for their cultural backgrounds.
Exactly.
And what I find really inspiring about Dr. Hoerricks' work is his emphasis on empowering students, giving them a voice in their own learning and assessment.
That's so important. When students feel like they have agency, like their voices are heard, their perspectives valued, they're going to be more engaged, more invested in their learning.
And that leads to a deeper understanding, regardless of what any test might say.
Exactly.
So it feels like this deep dive has really taken us on a journey. We started by unpacking the problems with standardized tests, and now we're envisioning a future where assessment is more equitable, more holistic, and really empowers students.
It has been a journey, hasn't it?
Mm.
And it's clear that there's no easy answer, no quick fix. Transforming education means changing how we think, being willing to challenge the status quo, and embrace a broader view of what it means to learn and to succeed.
It can feel daunting, but it's also incredibly inspiring to see so many educators, parents, and students out there doing amazing things, pushing boundaries, fighting for a better system.
That's what gives me hope. If we keep talking, keep asking those tough questions, keep working together, we can create a world where every student has the opportunity to thrive.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners. So until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future for all learners.